Welcome to the Future is Freelance podcast for solopreneurs, digital nomads, slowmads, consultants, remote workers, e-residents, and people living a life without traditional boundaries. We're here for everyone who defies categorization and makes a living and a life their own way. Every other Freelance Friday, we're serving up an audio cocktail of expert tips, inspired insights, and stories from the frontiers of freelancing to help you achieve success with your borderless business, whatever success means to you as you live life on your own terms. Thanks for listening to The Future is Freelance and for being part of the Future of Work revolution. So, unless you have been living under a rock on Mars, you can't have failed to notice the impact and buzz around artificial intelligence apps and particularly generative pre-trained transformers like ChatGPT. Of course, ChatGPT is not the only one, and probably throughout this episode where I really want to explore them in some depth from the freelancer perspective, I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. ChatGPT is the one I've been playing with the most, and that's probably because it's the fastest growing consumer technology app since its launch in November 22. And that's why there's been a huge amount of buzz around it, particularly when it was followed by a $1 billion investment from Microsoft. But it is important to remember it's not the only one. Google has a product called Bard, which it was actually working on over the long term. Back in June 22, one of its chief engineers resigned because they believed it was showing signs of sentience. So remember that OpenAI's product is not the first or the last or the only word. Lots of people are investing in, researching, pouring money, in fact, into these kind of generative models and training them on huge amounts of data. Like everything else, from the smartphone to the internet itself, there's a bit of a gold rush going on. And in fact, not for the first time, you could say that Google's been caught a little bit on the back foot here because of the way that OpenAI simply seized the public imagination and grew so fast. So they've been rushing to catch up with the release of Bard and really trying to ride that wave of public imagination that has been so thoroughly captured by what these large language models can do. So what are they doing? What can they do for you? And how can you use these kind of generative AIs in your freelance business in an ethical way? Well, the first thing to understand is what it's not doing. It is not thinking or feeling whatever Blake Lemoine thought or whatever Kevin Roos on the Hard Fork podcast recently described an amazing conversation with the Bing chatbot where it appeared to want to break up his marriage and fall in love with him. That was a link to that one in the show notes. That was a fascinating example of a pre-release of the Bing chatbot. And I think there are probably slightly more safeguards put in place around it now to avoid it being provoked by tech journalists trying to see whether it could break its programming. But basically what these models are doing is it's responding to a language set. And it's really important to remember that because the illusion is so powerful. This illusion's created these amazing conversational abilities. It makes them so easy to interact with. And the responses they generate can therefore be remarkably human-like. They can really hold meaningful conversations with people on a wide range of topics. And it feels like you're talking to another person. And that feeling of familiarity is because of the way the AIs are trained. But the thing is, they're essentially guessing at the expected next words or phrases. They're guessing really well. It's a highly educated guess because of the huge amounts of research they've done. They've essentially ingested vast swathes of the internet and other publications from public sources. So it's the same kind of principle as autocorrect. Imagine an incredibly smart autocorrect. So unlike the predictive text on your phone, it's capable of learning that you never intentionally tried to type the word shiv in your life. And in fact, it's working at the paragraph level, learning as it goes and generating huge pieces of text. In fact, it's working several paragraphs ahead. It's quite frightening how fast it can go when you ask it to generate something, particularly GPT-4, which is the latest release from OpenAI. So what's it doing then? It's predicting what it thinks you want to hear or read or see in the case of the visual AI generative models. And the way it's trained, it's not just on this data, but it is trained by humans as well before release. So it's important to realize that's where the continuous evolution is coming from. Not only is it being fed more and more terabytes of published information, there is reinforcement learning with human input. So that training layer uses humans to teach ChatGPT how to respond to various types of command. And so when you're interacting with the online tools, you're also training them. It's really important to realize that your interaction, you've got to read the small print if you want to check this out, is part of the online tool. You are training them yourself. And all the time, therefore, these models are getting smarter. It's becoming more and more realistic and human-like in its generation of responses. And those responses are becoming more and more natural and acceptable, creating a more and more relatable and user-friendly chatbot. So those are the main things you need to know before you log in and start playing with it. It's creating language that feels incredibly responsive and relatable and real. But, this is so important, just the fact that it's predictable and relatable does not mean it's accurate. It's drawing on its large language training to say something plausible linguistically, but it has no concept of or experience of the real world. It is not a human. It's trained on internet content up to, I believe it's September 2021. So responses might reference COVID, for example, and the lockdowns, but it knows nothing about the war in Ukraine and other huge global events. So you might find it commenting on things that make it sound like there's some contemporary up-to-dateness there, but it's missing an awful lot of context. And like some humans, when it doesn't know, it makes stuff up. It makes stuff up confidently, articulately, and persuasively, and it blends these fabrications in naturally among its known facts to create something that reads beautifully, but might be complete rubbish, or it might be 50% rubbish, and you have no idea which 50% it is. So you have to be really aware of this. And this is one reason that as freelancers, we need to be incredibly careful about how and when we might use these tools in our businesses and in our work. So, as a writer, you can imagine I've been paying attention to the massive amount of buzz and hype around ChatGPT and the various panics it has induced in different industries. It's fair to say that if my job was to create poetry on demand or basic filler content, I'd be quite concerned. But as a specialist content marketer and journalist, I know that these tools are not going to replace my creativity and professional services anytime soon. While there will definitely be new opportunities opened up to people who can put any new tool to work, and we don't know the half of what those opportunities are going to be yet. Certainly in journalism, there's going to be an awful lot of work for fact-checkers and sub-editors, I think, purely as a result of all this automatically generated content. But beyond that, we have no idea any more than people in the mid-90s could have predicted the wide variety of opportunities and industries that would spring from the existence of this brand new thing called the internet or email, when we used to write them with capital letters. Can you imagine anybody predicting all the careers and industries that would spring off the back of Web 2 and Web 3 marketing? It has really transformed the world beyond ways we could possibly have imagined. And I truly believe that this kind of artificial intelligence has the scope to be as transformative, but the point is we can't predict what it's going to do in the future. Of course, this fascinates me because I write about tech and I'm a geek, and I've always been absolutely obsessed with the intersection of technology on business and society. I've always been passionate about these things, from the nerdiest new productivity app to the latest shiny expensive thing at the Apple Store. So, of course, I'm all over this. And I've watched this frontier evolve over many years. I used to work in unified communications journalism a few years ago, and that was quite an interesting space when machine learning tools were starting to be added to business communications tools, even though they were a long way off being in the consumer space, you would find that you were interacting with some of these tools, even going back years. If you were a customer, if you wanted to get chat support from an app, for example, or from an online merchant, you would often find, as you still do, that the first level of support you got was unlikely to be human. And you still find this when you try to interact with lots of services, that it will encourage you to enter a question, but what it's doing is mainly picking out keywords in that question and then offering you a bunch of links to a fact, most of which will be completely irrelevant, or you might find you can go straight to the article that precisely answers what you need to know. And then that's dealt with. You're out of the queue to actually talk to the fewer but more expert humans that are on the payroll. And it means that those human agents develop greater specialism. They can spend more time with vulnerable customers or people who might have access issues or who simply need a bit more hand-holding. So it makes the customer service job more interesting, less repetitive. And this is a good thing. And this is an important thing to remember as we try to predict what kind of impact these large language models might have on work in the future. Because when I think of customer service work and call center work, I last did that kind of work when I was a student, actually. So we're going back quite a long way, sort of pre-internet, being hardwired by headphones into the vast boxes in a call center. And I spent a lot of time doing things like reading out terms and conditions when people were buying something or taking part in research. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that nobody would pay a human to do these days. All of this stuff can be done electronically and automatically, including actually having the conversations themselves now. And this is a good thing for the humans. It means they don't have to call when the call center is open. It means they can get served immediately. They don't have to sit in a queue and so on. So all of these advances in the business space have been really positive on both sides. And it means that those humans can provide more interesting, higher level solutions without having to do boring, repetitive work. Other tools in the business space include training modules. And again, a lot of these exploded during the remote work time enforced by the COVID pandemic because people weren't sitting next to somebody in an office being trained on how to use a new piece of software or how to deal with certain kinds of customer inquiries. So you might have a piece of software that's listening for particular keywords or interactions, and then it can nudge behavior, or it can analyze, for example, sales calls, an entire raft of sales calls, and pick out the key phrases or the inflection points or the things that led to a close successfully where some didn't, and really analyze, learning from that it would be very hard for a human to pick out. And others can work on a more enforcement and compliance basis and spot things that might be somebody's about to breach confidentiality in a regulated industry. There's all sorts of smart tools in the business space, and these things have been in development for many years, and it's only now that they're starting to break out into the consumer space that they're starting to go into this really interesting area for solopreneurs and freelancers. And it was only a matter of time, I do think, before these technologies, and I use the term breakout advisedly, I'm not talking about some kind of singularity moment where they're becoming independent and sentient. I mean simply breaking out in terms of awareness and popular understanding and the panic they can induce in mass media and high school teachers and everybody else. So, as I said, I'm not panicking at this point from a professional point of view. I didn't panic because of the existence of large numbers of competent content creators on Upwork, for example, who write for literally 1% of my rate, because we're not fishing in the same pond, and nobody who would consider using them would consider hiring me to write for them, and vice versa. You know, we live in a very abundant world when it comes to information creation. And I think the most important thing is to realize that and not see these tools as encroaching on your professional space. The same goes outside of writing, obviously, that excellent graphic designers still find clients who want their human insight and expertise, despite the fact that tools like Photoshop and Canva exist. I mean, something like Canva is designed for anybody to be able to use it, but those who still have expertise will get paid for their designs, even if those designs themselves then get used as templates in Canva by the person who purchases them and so on. It's the creativity that design eye of that individual that makes them still a viable commercial commodity. So I believe exactly the same thing will continue to apply to writing, and in the markets which I operate, it's absolutely essential to stay completely up to date with the latest news and information in any case. Basing my tech knowledge on the state of the world up to September 2021 really wouldn't cut it. But just like there are students trying their luck with GPT-written essays, there will be freelancers, and that includes writers, designers and developers and more, who try to pass off AI-generated content as their own. And they're going to be taking some huge risks, which we haven't even begun to see the legal ramifications unfolding. Not only is the accuracy problem I mentioned above a huge issue, don't forget that AI software is trained by scraping content that already exists on the internet. This means that the output that it creates can be a copy of or a derivative work of somebody else's copyright-protected work. So that's the first risk that you're taking. It means that you have no idea about the provenance or originality of what the AI is generating. It also means that it could create the same result for you as it does for somebody else inputting a similar prompt. Prompt engineering is becoming an entire industry and freelance category of its own right, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But as humans, we think the same way. We might put similar inputs into the AI and get very similar results, and there's nothing to stop it giving you exactly the same content as it has given to someone else. So because it won't reference or share its sources in any meaningful way, you've no idea if it's stealing ideas more than once. It might be stealing whole sentences that could be perceived as duplicate content picked up by Copyscape or even Google algorithms. So please don't use ChatGPT to write your content. It might make up the sources. I mean, you can ask it to cite its sources if you want to answer a scientific or academic question, but sometimes when you actually investigate, it won't give you links. It will tell you according to a paper in whatever journal. And sometimes that's completely made up too, because what it's doing is giving you an answer that sounds academically realistic and plausible. It's not giving you truth. So please remember that. In journalism and copywriting, you need to be able to credit sources, and there is no copyright in AI-generated content. If someone else's copyrighted work is used to create it and you have no idea who, then what you're outputting is unauthorized derivative work anyway. It's an infringement of somebody else's creative work. So it's far, far too risky to try and pass off AI-generated work as your own. And exactly the same obviously applies to art and visuals. And in GPT-4, we're going to see video generation as well. So even though we haven't seen the consumer-facing end of that yet, it's coming. It's great fun. Obviously, if you use something like DALL-E or Midjourney to generate art, you can come up with something that seems completely original, and you can play around with it. I mean, quite apart from how important your time is as a freelancer, don't blame me if you waste an entire afternoon. But you can end up with some beautiful stuff. You can end up with some horrendous stuff as well. It can't do hands and feet for some reason. Really terrifying outputs. But for the Remote Work Spain website, I use a header image which was generated in DALL-E 2, which was to try and get it to represent a digital nomad or remote worker using a laptop in Spain in the style of Sorolla, which, it's given me something absolutely unique that for me captures the flavor of why people might choose to emigrate to Spain to be a remote worker. And when you combine these classical influences with the latest technology, the results are really fascinating. So by all means, get it to write Shakespearean sonnets about space travel or whatever. But it's also essential to remember that these visual models in particular are trained on the work, the lifeblood of living artists. I believe it's incredibly ethically wrong to ask it to create anything in the style of somebody who's still working and producing and selling their work. For heaven's sake, hire them. If you want something in the style of somebody who is an artist, then hire that artist and let them create it for you, but it will be far better. And if you want to create something of your own using AI image generator, then you need to be a lot more creative about the kind of prompts you give it and the different layers with which you prompt it to combine different effects and styles and all sorts of things. And I think we're starting to see some of the stock photo sites, like it might be Getty now, which is trying to work out ways of actually monetizing and tracking how content and images are used to create new things with the AIs and finding some way of rewarding the artists. But it's going to be incredibly low paid, just as most royalties are anyway. It's going to take another layer away from that. So really be extremely careful on the ethical front. If you are a creative freelancer in any sphere, then remember that we all are, and we need to clamp down and make sure this doesn't get out of hand. And you have no idea also how it's going to mix those bits up and how it's going to regenerate and combine them. That's part of the fascination and fun of it, whether it comes to text or art. You don't know what consistency. There was a wonderful interview with Amanda Palmer and Neil Gaiman a few years ago, talking about the creative blender into which all our life experiences and ideas and influences and everything else goes. And then we use that to generate our art, whether that's writing or music or anything else. But what you don't know often is what setting that blender's on, whether it's going to actually include recognizable chunks. I know that as a writer, I've had people ask me about things, in novels and things like, is that based on, or people who can recognize things from my own life experience or recognize themselves within that. That's quite disturbing. So you need to think, if this is happening with other people's creative work as your raw ingredients in your creative smoothie, then how many chunks are going to come out? How many things are going to be blended in there so you can't even taste them, but they're having an influence on the flavor and the nutritional profile, to stretch this metaphor perhaps to breaking point. And just be really careful about anything that is being scraped from the internet and essentially used as your own work. But at least if it's scraping from the internet, you can say to an extent it's using stuff that's already public. Because another issue that I've seen some precedent starting to emerge from now is client IP. We have seen some results from AI being used really effectively to summarize things and pull out key points. This is one of its great strengths, but you need to be really careful when that comes to client IP, because you've probably signed an NDA, okay? So if you feed in a pitch deck from a client and say, write me some tweets about this, then you're exposing that client's pitch deck to ChatGPT, and it's going into that training module, okay? So you need to recognize that you are actually then part of that human feedback process. You have added that client IP in breach of your NDA to the data training set, and you can't get it back. And there are already large organizations banning the use of these models from their in-house computers. And it's only a matter of time before something a freelancer does exposes them to risk, and something emerges in the public domain, and there'll be some very interesting case law about that. It's too early at the moment, but it's going to happen. And this is the risk that you would take as a creative professional if you try to pass off AI-generated work as your own. Even Google agrees. And obviously Google isn't right about everything, but Google published a helpful content update last summer, and it kind of reminded the world that it's been dealing with automatically generated content and low-quality content for many years, and it will continue to deprecate that in favor of what it calls original helpful content. These are things that satisfy search intent, that are actually informative, opinionated, up-to-date, and useful to fellow humans. So I think that phrase should be every content marketer or journalist mantra: original helpful content. And it kind of got me thinking, actually. I don't want to go off on one too much, but at the moment, these models are trained on data up to September 2021, where I don't know if the whole internet was useful, helpful content, but at least it was original. It wasn't AI generated. And I'm wondering what happens now that one of the things we can predict is that the internet is going to be flooded with automatically generated content. And whether that's going to be read by humans or AIs, it's going to be read by the search spiders, and it's going to be read by these future training models. So we're going to have AI that's trained on AI generated content before too long. And I'm not quite sure what happens then. Maybe it all just gets so much worse. Maybe it creates more space for human originality and thought to differentiate from that. Maybe the whole internet becomes an unbearable place and we go back to writing each other poems on pieces of paper or something, simply to avoid this cascade of content generating content. Maybe we'll finally get away from using this awful word content to describe what writers do anyway. I've never liked it, but it's never felt quite so much like something delivered by the bucket and trowel load as when you can get a machine to generate it by a few clicks. So anyway, that's just something we can't possibly make predictions about, but I do wonder what happens when AI starts feeding the AIs. And I realise I've spent 25 minutes of this podcast talking about how not to use AI and what the dangers are as a freelancer. So it is important that I reflect a little bit on how it can help you as a freelancer and why I believe it's important to embrace and understand all it can do, along with it, understanding its limitations. So I think one of the first things to do is be very clear how you differentiate yourself from it and that you don't use it to generate content. If you have agreements with your clients, if you have terms and conditions on your website, for example, about things like outsourcing, you might want to update those terms and make it very clear that you do not subcontract to AIs in any way, or you don't try to pass off AI-generated work as your own. But you can definitely use it to augment your work in areas that you're weak at, or when you need some stimulation, you need some new ways of looking at things. For example, I used ChatGPT last week to generate headlines for an article. I'd spent a lot of time on writing the article, but I just reached a blank when it came to the headline, which I always write last, and it's got to satisfy both, the search spiders and the humans. I tend to end up wanting to go for something witty and journalistic, where actually from an SEO point of view, it's more important it's got the right keywords in, because that headline is really important. And basically, I put the whole article into ChatGPT and said, write me 10 headlines for this that satisfy SEO criteria. And it came up with 10 options, like within seconds of my hitting the return key, as it does after I've been sweating with this for a while and not coming up with anything I liked. And some of them were quite good. Some of them were complete rubbish. I ended up going with a combination of two bits, like there was a bit before the colon and a bit after it. And when I smooshed them together, it was a nice headline that kind of worked for humans as well as search. I then put that whole string into Google to make sure it wasn't a headline that was already in use, because bearing in mind everything I said above about how it is fed by stuff that's already out there. And I found, it was a unique headline. I could use it. And so I did. And that was one way that it really helped me. I've also found myself using it for social media inspiration. For example, asking it to write a tweet about a piece of content that I'd written. Again, once you've written something, you've spent time on it, you're too close to it. For that same article, I could get it to come up with 2 or 3 tweets to promote it, to draw out the right hashtags. You might be able to get it to generate new hashtags based on the ones that you frequently use, but you end up just using the same ones over and over. I've been doing some consultancy work with some trainees recently about growing LinkedIn presence and trying to help them find new people to follow and connect with. And one thing that I asked ChatGPT to do, GPT-4 wouldn't do this incidentally, but GPT 3.5, which I think is the default at the moment, was quite happy to give me a list of people in a given niche who were influential to follow. And GPT 3.5 gave me their LinkedIn handles as well. So you could literally open in new tabs from within the GPT window and quickly send connection requests to each of those people. GPT-4 wouldn't give me the handles, but it gave me a slightly different list. Again, it depends on your niche, because obviously it's looking at who's influential in that space up to September 2021, which might be very out of date in fast-moving spheres. But it's just a new way of looking at things. It's like having an assistant to bounce ideas off, or a second set of eyes on things. And we're starting to see these tools actually be built into social media software. I know that Buff has already introduced it. You want to tweet a particular piece of content, but you can't necessarily decide the best phrasing or the best emojis or the best hashtags to use. sometimes you can use these tools just to give you some ideas. And again, you might take a sentence from here and an emoji from there, and there's a hashtag I never would have thought of, but it looks like it's got quite high search volumes, and it can give you ideas that you can combine in your unique way. So that's another way you can use it. What else? Research is another way that I've found it quite useful. When I'm looking into writing something in detail, I might clip loads of different articles, and I tend to chuck them all into a Notion database. But one thing, I was using the Notion beta AI because it was free in Notion, and it's not anymore, and I haven't turned it on because I don't want to pay for AI everywhere. But obviously it would be very easy to do this using a ChatGPT workaround as well. If I clip a long research article, and I read it at the time and I know what's important to me, but I could then use the AI to write a summary of it, including certain keywords that are important to me, so I can track them in my database, because I might not reference that article when I come to write about it for some time. I might not want to open up the whole thing, particularly if it's a heavy, dense piece of research. It's really useful to have a paragraph that basically reminds me why I clipped it, what's important to me about it, and AI can be really useful for that. It can also be useful for exploring other activities that you have no idea how to do. This might be helpful when you're collaborating with other freelancers, when you're briefing other people, if you're outsourcing something like a graphic design, you might be able to use an AI to help you generate a description. I had an idea for an app, actually, and I was wondering, could I get somebody on Upwork to make this for me? It is brilliant. I haven't done it yet, but it was an idea to scrape data from Vinted about when certain things I want to keep an eye on go on sale. And so I asked GPT-4 about how I could develop an app for this, and it basically gave me back strings and strings of code. Now, if I knew enough about what I was doing, I could probably build it from that. I mean, I literally don't, but what it did give me was great confidence that I could write an exceptional brief for somebody on Upwork or Fiverr to create that app for me. And that's something I would have no idea how to do, but it would give me that starting point, that groundwork for interacting with a fellow professional who could put that together and polish it up and finish it off and give me something really good. So that was an interesting use. And yes, as I've said, I do use it for graphics, not things that I would consider hiring a designer for and paying for, but things I would have done myself in Canva, things I would have used a stock image for. You can actually create something completely unique using Midjourney or DALL-E 2. So why not? Again, the ethical issue is that you would not use it in terms of scraping ideas from a living artist. But if you're happy to combine different styles and approaches and keywords, you can come up with something quite fun and unique. It's going to be eye-catching. It's great for social media posts and so on. So yes, you can use it as a freelancer. You can use it for efficiency. You can use it for productivity. There are loads of apps out there now that are using AI in different ways to do things like ingest your entire to-do list and your calendar and then create a schedule of work, which is time blocking and efficient and puts certain things batched together and so on. If you find that useful, it's well worth doing. And the thing is, we've always had productivity apps like list making and things like that. Basically, what the AI can do is just make a smarter version of that. It can enhance your app. It can do things like you send an invoice, so you think, okay, I want to set a reminder so I know it's being paid by a certain date. But instead, an AI might be able to generate that reminder for you, or it might be able to calculate the interest you need to charge on it. It might remind you in a year's time you've just paid for the annual rate for that piece of software that you find really useful. So it can create something more like a smart tickler file for how much notice you have to give to review that app. Is it still serving your purpose before suddenly this whopping great debit goes out in a year's time because you'd forgotten about it because you're not using it anymore? So these are all things that you could put the AI to work for you as a freelancer in an ethical way. You need to learn how to instruct it, how to write great prompts. And there are an awful lot of different training and information products in development now. And hands up, yes, I am working on one on personal knowledge management and research for freelancers. But I think this is where one of the most interesting areas for freelancers is going to be, is learning how to become a great prompt engineer And it's important to immerse yourself in that, to study it, to learn how to do it. I've been taking in as many different training courses and resources as I can. There are people at the cutting edge of this for different industries. A shout out to Jennifer Goforth-Gregory for her training package on using it as a writer, and some of the ideas about headlines and tweets and things like that. I found her input really helpful there. And in fact, the whole role of writing these prompts, prompt engineering, is going to be becoming something that I think will become a freelance niche in its own right in different spheres. We're going to see loads of people adding it to their LinkedIn bios, just like everybody 3 years ago was suddenly a remote work advocate. We're going to see everybody is suddenly going to be a prompt engineer. That's my prediction. But if you find a great prompt, then I would say it's likely to be something unique to you. If you find something, you figure out a way to get the AI to give you exactly what you want, then save it, hang on to it, put it in your text expander, make a list, hang on to it somewhere, because that's the kind of thing that's going to lead to greater efficiencies for you in the future. As I pointed out, you won't always get the same result using it a second time, but it's one of those things where just one word or inflection different might give you what you want. And then you'll find more and more ways that you can use these AI apps to simply make you more efficient, to automate repetitive tasks. Just as you might use a chatbot on your website to deal with those first line of inquiries, you can let the AI handle all sorts of things. Analyzing data as well. Though bear in mind what I said earlier about client IP. If it's your own IP, why not feed it into the AI and get it to analyze things like who are your most profitable clients? If you have timesheet data as well, what products actually were the best for your business in terms of how long it took you to create them and how much profit you're making on them, how many volume sales, what clients would you ideally like to clone and do more work for, which clients are actually turn out to be your best from a financial point of view, which you might not spot yourself because you're so tied up in the emotional aspect of working with them. So there are all sorts of things that the AI might be able to pick out for you. Above all, you can use AI to stay at the edge of your field and stay more relevant and interesting to your clients than any AI could ever be itself. You can use it to help develop your thought leadership and make sure that you retain your unique voice and your ideas. That if you use these tools correctly, they will free you up to do this in order to help you stay ahead of the trends and the news and the things that are going on in your industry in a way that these tools will never be able to, even the ones linked to search. They won't be able to synthesize different things from different places and put them together in the unique way that only you can. And that's what your clients are paying for. You as a human will understand the needs of humans at the end of the day. Whether you're working in branding or communications or creating tools for other humans to use, you're going to be able to do that in a way that AI never will. So you can use the AI ethically and efficiently as a freelancer to take care of the things that suck your time away so that you can focus on building relationships, being great to work with, aligning yourself with your clients' goals, exceeding their expectations, emphasizing what you bring to the table as a human, that they can bounce ideas off, that you can act more and more strategically for. These are the things that no AI is ever going to take away from you as a freelancer, as an expert in your field. Use it on the back end for your admin and to streamline your life and focus on the things that only you can bring to the table for your clients' businesses to benefit from. And that's why I believe overall that AI and GPT models can be powerful tools for freelancers and creative industries to really improve administration and productivity and efficiency. And while we don't know how these things are going to transform our world, we know that AI is now a part of our world. And we can march in protest, as teachers apparently once did, against the pocket calculator, but it won't help. And remember that popular history talks about the Luddites for breaking the machines, but actually what they were fighting for was fair pay for skilled work, creating high quality goods. And let's remember that as solopreneurs seeking to deploy AI tools ethically and efficiently to enhance our work. They're never going to replace our customer service, our creativity and our imaginations, but they are part of our world and we need to make friends with them. I hope you enjoyed those reflections and you're looking forward to finding new ways of deploying AI within your own freelance and solopreneur business. And in the meanwhile, I've been learning other things too. As many of you will know, regular listeners, that I recently relaunched The Future is Freelance as a completely independent publication. And that's involved me in some quite steep learning curves of all sorts of things that I used to have expert help with. And one of the manifestations of that this week is the launch of a new website. So I would love it if you would pop along and take a quick look at futureisfreelance.xyz. Yep, a little bit unusual, that XYZ, but get used to it. Just like AI, you're going to be seeing a lot more of it, I suspect. And that's where the new website for this show is residing. Now, it was built using Podpage, which I really, really liked and highly recommend. In fact, I'll pop a link to them in the show notes. It made it completely me-proof to create what I think is a nice looking and highly functional home for this podcast. You can check out all the episodes from all 3 seasons have been imported there. You can check out some video. There isn't much there yet, but I promise you there will be more. And I promised Steph from the previous episode there will be more video coming. You can read the blog there that accompanies each episode that I send out as an email newsletter to people who are subscribed, and you can subscribe to the newsletter there as well. So please come and take a look at futureisfreelance.xyz. You can even use that site to send us a review or a comment or a voicemail. Perhaps we will have your comments live in a future episode. Love to know what you think, and thanks so much for your support in this and in everything. Thank you for listening to the Future is Freelance podcast. We appreciate your time and attention in a busy world and your busy life. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a fellow freelancer. Help us grow this movement of independent entrepreneurs. If you rate and review The Future is Freelance in whatever app you're listening to this right now, or over at futureisfreelance.xyz, then that will help spread the word and help us reach more people who need to hear this message and join the conversation. Together, we can change the world and make sure the future is freelance. This is Maya Middlemiss wishing you success and happiness in your enterprise until our next episode.